Hi, my name is Bill Incolingo, and my project for the Technology Leadership for School Improvement class is the Robert K. Schaefer Middle School Flipped Classroom Technology Plan. My needs statement for the Flipped Classroom focuses on the growing expectations for schools and students as well as teachers. Um, Students are expected to show growth on a consistent basis. And even with all these challenges, we don't always have the amount of instructional time to actually accomplish everything that we're supposed to be setting out. So that's one of the things as well that I tried to emphasize in my needs statement is that we need more instructional time. Problem with adding more instructional time is it gets to be a very, very costly aspect, for the taxpayers and for school boards. No one wants to see taxes raised, but how do you go ahead and get additional academic time? In addition to the demand for the academic time, we also have more social emotional needs facing our students now, and so we need to go ahead and come up with a solution to get that additional time for kids, so we can support them in as a full student, not only academically but socially, emotionally. The one thing I did emphasize at the end of the needs statement was that many of the things that we have in place at Robert K. Schaefer Middle School are things that will be beneficial to implementing a flipped classroom or flipped learning environment. So flipped learning research, some of the research I presented or I put in my paper was basic idea that what we're doing with the flipped learning environment or the flipped classroom is we are switching what we've traditionally done. Usually it's direct instruction, lecture in school. We're now taking that and putting it outside of school, either through videos or other electronic media. And then the things that we did at home, like homework, we're now doing in the schools. And the reason we do that is because in the flipped classroom environment, you are now getting more teacher to student face time. That means more support for students, more knowledge being gained about the students by the teacher. It just makes for a much more cohesive way of educating students. The Flipped Learning Network, along with Pearson Schools Achievement, have identified some key features of flipped classrooms. And they've called these the 4 pillars. First pillar being flipped learning requires flexible environments. If you are a very rigid person and you don't want to give up your traditional lecturing, you're going to have a hard time with flipped classrooms or flipped learning. The reality is you are going to have to be willing to accept much more individualized learning, students working collaboratively within groups, and you're going to have to relinquish a lot of the control that you normally would have in a traditional classroom environment. Pillar 2 is flipped learning requires a shift in learning culture. Kind of goes right along with number 1, that you need to actually take on the role of a facilitator of learning as opposed to the sage on the stage. You need to be willing to help the students learn and make them responsible for their own learning. The third pillar is flipped learning requires intentional content. You have to select the material that is going to be presented to the students, usually at home or outside the traditional classroom, very carefully. You have to make sure that it's meaningful and that is going to be something that can be tied back into what the students are doing within the classrooms while you're there supporting them. Pillar 4, flipped learning requires professional educators. In that area, it needs people that are going to be able to develop a balance between what should be learned at home, what should be learned in the classroom, and really be willing to, once again, work and provide support on that face-to-face time and making this flipped learning a positive experience for the students that they are responsible for. Other research that I included, basically there's not a ton of research out there on flipped learning. A lot of it does come from the flipped learning network. But what has been out there is there's plenty of research on certain instructional practices, and many of the instructional practices within flipped learning are those well reviewed and well respected instructional practices. The idea that flipped learning is student centered, and the idea with the increased teacher to student face time being at the core of flipped learning. Active learning is also at the core of flipped learning, which can come in the form of group work, collaboration, problem-based, discussion forums, all sorts of things geared around having the students create create information and making real meaning of their learning. Flipped learning research continued. So in order to sell this to the stakeholders, to whomever this is being presented to, I think it's important to try and get some success stories, so to speak, some data that would help them. So there is some evidence that flipped classrooms, flipped learning works very well with the different subgroups. If you have low-level math students in a high school, so much of what they can do to close the gap and learn their basics, they can do a lot of that at home, okay? Whether it be through a Khan Academy or some other website that's available to students to work on the math. And then when the student comes in the next day, any questions that could be handled or asked can be handled by the teacher during that class period. And the students can practice the math. Most kids, when they go home, a lot of their parents aren't very good at the math because they say, oh, I was never very good at math. So they will go ahead and they won't be able to help their child. But in school, the math teacher will be able to. So there were also two high schools, Byron Public Schools in Minnesota, that increased their math scores considerably and later became a blue ribbon school as a result of it. And there's also Clintondale High School in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, that increased their test scores, their state test scores. Both of these schools are schools that switched over to a flipped learning environment, and it's expected out of most of the teachers to go through with the flipped learning environment, and they have been very successful. The other information I put there was some teacher and student survey information to show that 80% of the teachers think that flipped classrooms after they started using them it's been very beneficial. Students, it was only about 70% of them liked the flipped classroom, but overall, the idea of having that information, I think, is good to be presented to anyone who's making a decision on switching this to this type of instructional practice. Okay, so the plan description. The goal is to implement a flipped classroom model within Robert K. Schaefer Middle School to improve instructional practices and student learning. We're going to create a committee consisting of 7 to 10 people, teachers, administrators, parents, students, technology department staff. Maybe over 10 by the time we add on all those people, but we'd like to keep it a small enough group that we're not slowing things down, but a large enough group where we're getting lots of input and making sure we're representing all the stakeholders we can. Okay, so the idea is to develop a plan that will help us gain support for the project. We will research and visit other schools that have implemented the successful flipped classrooms and determine what models might be applicable for us. We'll establish a timeline. We'll assess what type of technology or other resources that may be needed to carry out the plan. We will develop a budget, and we will also present to our curriculum department at curriculum modifications to try and get their support in modifying and going to this type of instructional philosophy. We would begin some professional development. We would have to first, find some people to support the professional development. We'd have to develop our own professional development activities as well. We would measure the success of the flipped classroom through standardized tests, through student grades and student achievement, and we would also use student, teacher, parent surveys and that sort of thing to help assess how we are doing. The leadership model to be employed would be transformational leadership. So transformational leaders, leadership is a model of integrity and fairness. It sets clear goals, has high expectations, encourages others, provides support and recognition, stirs the emotions of people, gets people to look beyond their own self-interest, and inspires people to take risks and reach for the improbable. So I believe that transformational leaders are the type of people that you need to carry out any project because you value the people you're working with. You go ahead and you create relationships which make it a real positive and a good working environment, and people are working towards that one common vision. Potential obstacles to the implementation, making sure that we have enough technology available to students, have the technology available to them outside of the school to allow the teachers to flip their classrooms. So there are some challenges to that, but there are some ways you can combat that. Some of it could be saving some of the lessons on flash drives or burning them to a CD, or making sure the students have access to computers or technology within the school, but not during the normal classroom time. Making sure they have them at the end of the school day, beginning of the school day, looking for those opportunities. The big changes the big challenges will come through the teachers. Too often, teachers desire to maintain the status quo. People in general, not just teachers, do not like change all that much. And if you are so used to teaching a certain way, chances are you're not going to be eager to all of a sudden change the way you've approached education. And also go away from the way you were taught. Teachers are not willing to always acknowledge the need for change. And again, not just teachers, people in general. But the teachers are going to be the biggest sticking point in that. So project management basically was the plan description. And then what I did is I actually broke it down into a timeline. And if you look at if you can see the small screen there, the timeline starts in January of 2016, and it's running until the end of August 2016 to roll it out into the classrooms. In that process, it spells out, developing the professional development, when the professional development days are going to take place, and they are aligned with our PD days and our beginning of the school year and everything else. Budget. The thing with the budget is really, the way I'm looking at it is flipped learning requires a limited budget for Robert K. Schaefer Middle School because most of the structure is in place. It's going to be, the primary thing is going to be the professional development. So initially 4 days at $1,500, travel expenses for site visits we're going to have to make, and also cost of printing for our communication plan. The idea is we want the communication plan to be carried out, and we really need to make sure that that is getting out to the to our stakeholders. And the other piece is if we have any infrastructure needs and hardware needs, we need to take care of that. More than likely, we will not have any infrastructure needs. We may have to come up with a plan to help provide students with technology they might be able to take home for those students that are not capable of supplying their own. Change management, quote here, a critical issue for a project manager leading change is the ability to challenge routine because any system will unconsciously conspire to maintain the status quo and prevent change. Goes along with what I was saying earlier about the status quo. People do not like change. So what we have to do is we have to try and promote within people the intrinsic rewards of doing things. Servano also has said that people initially will respond to extrinsic rewards, but that does not last very long. So what you really need is you need to make the people realize the value of what they're doing is important and go on with that. The other thing is we need to develop a teacher team / committee of early adopters. If you can get that to work, and I've had that in my own experiences where I get those core teachers that people will follow, people will be supported, and they will support the people that you're trying to implement the plan with, it usually is much more successful. And then we need to work with stakeholders and champions of the initiative. Again, the early adopters for that much. Early adopters can also help to train the other teachers. Communication plan. So communicate with the stakeholders. That's the who. Okay, we're going to have to communicate to district administration, teachers, parents, community, students. Okay, they all need to be part of this. They cannot just be out there, and we can't assume that students are just going to go ahead and figure this out at the very end. We need to keep them in the loop all the way, just to make them feel more comfortable and also to respect them. Communicate with stakeholders, the how. Okay, so we can use district website for communication, district email. All right, and we can send out newsletters. We have one call telephone notification system. We can use Remind, a text messaging app, to let them know. We can use this different surveys to gather information and share it with people, and also give them a way of reporting back to us how they feel about things. Family / community meetings. Title I nights might come into play at certain schools if you're a Title I school. Board meetings are also available to other people. Other avenues, because the board's going to need to be kept in touch with what's going on. District staff and faculty meetings. The communication plan is broken into 4 different groups. You have, the introduction of everything and getting and sharing the initial information about what flipped classrooms are and developing a shared vision with people, getting their feedback. The second part is the flipped classroom updates. So, you go through that initial teacher training, and so what's the update? How are the teachers responding to it? What do they think about it? The third segment would be flipped classroom updates again, teachers, student training, parents, community members, updates using district website. Okay, keep everybody informed of what's going on. So one, they don't think the initiative has died, but they see that there is some success. And if there are problems, don't be afraid to share some of the issues, but you always want to direct the statements cautiously. And finally, you need to be able to collect data and begin to show the successes and celebrate the successes that you're having within the program. Well, that is my final project. Hopefully it isn't too long. Thank you very much. I enjoyed putting this together. Have a great holiday.